Welcome to Kabbalah, an introduction to an ancient Jewish mystical tradition. There are two basic ideas about Jewish mysticism that underpin Kabbalah. Rabbi Ari Sollish, director of Intown Jewish Academy of Chabad, Intown of Atlanta, explains.
Number one is that Kabbalah speaks about what happens on a very grand level, what happens in the cosmic spheres, what happens in the greater universe, and it speaks about God and angels and spiritual realms and other worlds, spiritual worlds and sphirot, entries of life, all these mystical concepts. At the same time, Kabbalah also speaks about what lies inside of us and what's inside of our heart. And I think that that duality of the without and the within, of the macrocosm and the microcosm, is what makes Jewish mysticism so unique. You have a lot of mystical traditions that the end goal of that tradition is to leave the material, leave the physical, and to ascend to the spiritual. Judaism has a very unique take. Jewish mysticism is, one might say, counterintuitive, in that the holier one is, the more grounded one is.
A story about the biblical patriarch Abraham illustrates the concept of as above, so below, or inside.
So Abraham is sitting at the entrance of his tent, and it's 3 days after his circumcision. And the angels come to him, and the angels say, they're the appearances of human beings, but they are asking him, the appearances of human beings, but of course they're angels. And Abraham invites them in, and he offers them food, and he takes care of them. And at some point, they ask him for his wife. Where's your wife? And he says, she's in the tent. And they proceed to have a conversation, and the angels bless him that he will have a child in a year's time, and that child is Isaac. What's interesting is that in Kabbalah it's explained that why did they ask about his wife? Because they couldn't imagine that this was Abraham. You see, in heaven, Abraham had a tremendous reputation. It was known in heaven, when you look down at the earth, there was a light that was shining, and the light was emanating from Abraham's tent. The light was illuminating the whole world from that one space on earth. And so the angels had an opportunity to interface, to connect with Abraham. And the angels in interfacing with Abraham, they were expecting to see some sort of mystic, some sort of spiritual giant. And when they came to him, the first thing that Abraham said is, are you hungry? Can I get you something to eat? Can I make you a sandwich? Prepare some food for you. Wash your feet, come on in. He's like an innkeeper, like a bed and breakfast proprietor. So that was his way of dealing with people. And the angels are thinking, this is the holy man on earth. This is a chef. This is an innkeeper. This is a hotel owner. This is not a holy man. So they said, where's your wife? And he says, no, she's also inside the tent. What you're looking for, you're not going to find. On earth, what is holy? Holy is if someone's hungry, you give them something to eat. If someone is lonely, you invite them in. If someone doesn't have a place to stay, you help them have a place. So holiness in Judaism, spirituality in Judaism, and mysticism in Judaism is not about escaping. It's not about escapism, escaping the material and ascending to some sort of spiritual state of nirvana. Rather, it's grounding, it's integrating spiritual truths, higher truths, with everyday life. That is true holiness. And I feel like that's something that's unique to Jewish mysticism, to Kabbalah, that perhaps might get lost in the larger conversation.
That mitzvah of hospitality.
Yeah, but also the very notion that to find holiness and to find God, it's not about climbing the mountain, but it's about living a good life, a virtuous life right here. One of the Torah portions in the book of Leviticus, the name of it is Kedoshim, which means holiness. And the entire portion is filled not with meditation, and not with prayer, and it's filled with basic laws. If someone needs money, lend it to them. And when you lend it to them, don't take interest. Love your fellows yourself. Honor your parents and your elders. Basic mitzvot. Don't put a stumbling block in front of someone who's blind. All of these very day-to-day obligations, human obligations, that's wherein holiness lies. So you can find God by searching searching the atmosphere, or you can find God in the everyday. Kabbalah illuminates our eyes and allows us to see God in the everyday. I think that is, to me, that is the most daring piece of Kabbalah. Not that you can find God in heaven, because everyone can find God in heaven, but that you can find God on earth, that's pretty cool.
So, what is the nature of God, according to Kabbalah, if God is found in the ordinary?
So, God, in the understanding of Kabbalah, God is everywhere, and God is the force behind everything. And yet, we cannot say that everything is God. So, the vitality of the chair that I'm sitting in, or the chair that you're sitting in, or the walls around us in this room, the windows, right? The lights. So the vitality that's flowing through all of that is certainly a divine vitality. Kabbalah teaches that nothing could exist without that divine flow of energy. Everything is lifeless matter, and even more so, it's not existent. It's non-existence. It's simply nothingness without that animating force of God. So everything is godly, and everything is constantly being animated and enlivened and imagined by God in every moment. And yet it wouldn't be accurate to say that therefore the chair is God, or the walls are God, or the windows are God, or the lights are God. Although godliness and divine vitality is the life force that's flowing through it, it wouldn't be accurate to say that therefore this is God. It's almost like saying that a projection is nothing other than the source light shining in a certain way. And yet, it's hard to say that the projection itself is the source light. In other words, the source light is what is giving it shape and giving it the appearance of being whatever it is, but it is not the source light itself. It's a manifestation or a product of the source light, but it's not the source light itself. So therefore the chair is not God, because that would imply that the chair is the source that is likewise in everything. The chair is of the source, and from the source, and by the source, and with the source, but it's not the source itself.
And so God is referred to in Hebrew as Ein Sof, without end.
The Kabbalists love this term. The Kabbalists love calling God Ein Sof, which literally means without end. Now, in English we might use the word infinite. Infinite is partially accurate. The Kabbalists don't say Ein Techila, that God has no beginning. Rather, God has no end. Although God also has no beginning, but the phrase in Kabbalah is has no end. And the Kabbalists discuss why that phraseology, why Ein Sof and not Ein Techila, why without end and not without beginning. The bottom line is, no matter how you look at it, God certainly is not limited by the parameters that appear around us. So whereas the chair, going back to the chair example, the chair that I'm sitting in has certain parameters and has a definition. It's comprised of certain materials, and those certain materials have their properties and have their limitations. It has a certain shape, a certain color, and it doesn't have other shape or other color, so it's limited to where it is. The Ein Sof, God's essential power, is unlimited. God is not limited. The Kabbalists say God is not even limited to the unlimited, which means that God can also inform limitation, and God is also the source of limitation. But at the same time, one cannot say that God is stuck within limitation. God also is found within limitation, but God, in essence, is in a state of true and absolute and perfect unlimitedness without limitation.
God is not nothing, and yet God is not a thing. It's more like electricity, or it. God.
Right.
So. Because I've heard that reference.
Yeah. So God is not a thing as we define a thing. But that doesn't mean that God is not. It just means God is not a thing. Because when we define things as things, we immediately are thinking of something that has limitation, defined by time and space. So it exists at a certain moment, in a certain parameter of reality. Certain shape, certain size, certain nature. God is not subject to these sorts of limitations. God is not subject to the limitations of time and space. God is beyond time and space. Time and space is a reality or a limitation that God imposes upon the universe, but God is not bound by those self-same limitations. So when we say that God is not a thing, what it means is not that God doesn't exist, but that God doesn't exist in the way that we understand existence. Because to say that God exists and God is a thing would conjure up in our minds a picture of God existing, sitting on a bigger chair, in a bigger body, with a longer beard and a whiter beard, maybe with some sort of scepter or zapper or whatever it is that people conjure up. So the problem of conceiving of God as a thing is that it anthropomorphizes God, and it kind of brings God into the realm of limitation. And Kabbalah says that is not an accurate portrayal of God. God is not in limitation. That doesn't mean that God is nothing, or that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. What it means is God doesn't exist the way we know existence. Now, from God's perspective, this is not real existence, and God's existence is the true definition of existence. See, for us, we know existence the way we know existence, and God's existence is some other form of existence. Whereas for God, God's existence is the existence, whatever that is. And our existence, you call that existence? You're telling me you exist? How long do you exist for? Right? It's in the books of the prophets, it tells the story of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the fierce leader of the Babylonians who ended up destroying the first Jewish temple right around 2,500 years ago. And this Nebuchadnezzar, he was obsessed with himself. He thought that he was a god. He thought he was his own creator. Right? I made myself, self-made man. We even use that phrase today, right? A self-made man. But he literally thought that. God says, really? You're a self-made man? You're in charge? Not so fast. How long do you live? Right? How long are you around for? 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, 100 years if you're lucky. You know how short that is? Relative to no time or beyond time? So God is not a thing that's a limited thing, but God is.
The challenge, if you will, is to understand both the way humans connect with God as well as the creative process.
It's not that there was nothing. When I say nothing other than God, and then poof, everything is in existence. Trees, birds, plants, oceans and seas and rivers and lakes. What creation unfolds in a step-by-step process that the Kabbalist term Seder Hishtalshalut, which means the order and the chain of evolution. Now, it doesn't mean the evolution necessarily that you and I study in biology class, but it nonetheless means that spiritually there's an evolutionary process, or perhaps a devolutionary process, where reality unfolds. So first you have spiritual reality, then you have a little bit less spiritual reality, and that unfolds until we hit physical, tangible reality as we know it. It's kind of like in any creative process of making something, when you have an idea, first the idea is a little abstract, and then when you think about it, you narrow it down, and you narrow it down more and more and more and more and more. And even when you've narrowed down the idea and you have your idea, you still don't have the product, or you still don't have the business, or you don't have whatever it is that you conceive of, or the house or the home. You still don't have the actual item, but you've now narrowed it down. And then you can begin building the actual thing, or creating the actual item. And so it's a similar process when it comes to God's creative process, that God doesn't create, poof, everything out of nothingness, but it actually, as the Kabbalists explain, it evolves over various steps or throughout various steps.
Kabbalah speaks of 4 spiritual realms or worlds: Atzilut, emanation; Briah, creation; Yetzirah, formation; Asiyah, action.
So these are the 4 realities. The first world, the world of Atzilut, is the world of emanation. Nothing yet exists, or you don't have separateness existing or otherness existing. It's just an emanation. It's the most gentle emanation of one kind of moving toward the space of otherness without being truly other. An example that's used is like lighting one fire from another. It's a gentle movement from here to there. It's very gentle. It's still fire. It's still of the same essence almost, but now it's in a new space. It's been transferred over. It's an emanation of light from the Ein Sof to this reality. And now you have the first realm. And then you have the world of creation, where that flame, if you will, becomes a little bit more concretized. And then the world of formation, where it becomes formed, it takes on a little bit more shape. And then it becomes truly concretized in physical reality, and that's the world of action. We live in the world of Asiyah, the final world, the fourth world, the world of action. Now, why do I mention this? First of all, because it's interesting to see the process of creation, but also because, as the Kabbalists explain, the reason why God created with this 4-step process and didn't just create everything out of pure nothingness in one go is in order to allow us to climb back up. You see, if God didn't create the ladder, we couldn't climb up. Imagine if there was this infinite gap between creator and creation. Without that scaffolding, without those steps, without those chains and rungs leading down, we wouldn't have the ability. We wouldn't know how to get back up. But because creation unfolds in a step-by-step process, so therefore we have the ability to understand that. First of all, it's the way we operate. We operate in kind of, with steps. So it's a more logical process. Even within the illogic of creating something out of nothing, you have some sort of logic of doing so in a step-by-step process. Even though it's ultimately illogical, how do you create something out of nothing? But that still unfolds in a gradual process so that it feels a little bit more comfortable. And like I said, it allows us in some way to conceptualize how that works and to then deconstruct it almost and climb back up. Not that the goal is to leave existence totally and climb back up to God. That's not necessarily the goal. The goal is to live a good life here while we're here. But nonetheless, it gives us an insight into the nature of God and how to connect with God to then translate that back down into living a good life. You see, and I want to speak about this ebb and flow for just a moment. It's important to know this idea in Kabbalah that you need to feel the desire to cleave to God, and then the recognition that if you really want a relationship with God, God wants you to still be here. It's that duality. You see, if I don't care about anything higher, then what are the odds that I'm going to live a meaningful life? Now, I could live a meaningful life, but it makes it, I think, a little bit more difficult. But if I'm yearning for something greater, but I know I have responsibilities here, then then even when I'm here, I can lift it up a little bit, and that's the goal.
And there are regular, routine ways to connect with the divine in Jewish mystical and daily life.
A major part of Jewish life. And one might see this as Jewish ritual life. Without it, having not studied Kabbalah, one might think that it's just rote and ritual. But what I'm referring to is prayer. Prayer is an essential part of Jewish life. And when you study Kabbalah, you realize that prayer is not just chanting words off a page or singing songs in a synagogue, but it's an experience to climb the ladder. In fact, if you take the Jewish prayer book and you study the mystical insights into the prayers, you realize that the prayers are actually designed in 4 parts, mirroring the 4 worlds that I spoke about. So that we start off at the bottom and we climb up rung by rung, step by step, until we commune with God in the highest prayer, the prayer of the Amidah, which when we stand and we stand still, and traditionally we stand with our feet together, And although we recite the words in an audible way, it's done very silently and very quietly. It's done in a way that only our own ears can hear the prayer, and it shouldn't be heard by anyone else around us. So it's that perfect, seamless communion with God that represents the highest rung of the ladder, the world of emanation. So it's like we're climbing up from the lowest to the highest, step by step in prayer. So yeah, prayer, meditation before prayer. There are other traditions associated. One is giving charity before prayer, and it sounds like a very, mundane thing. What, I should find somebody to give money to, or put a few coins or a few dollars into a charity box, a tzedakah box? Yeah. Because when we do a mitzvah like that, it again grounds the experience and ensures that it's not going to be solely a self-serving, flight, but it's rather all about a higher mission to bring holiness back into the world that we live in, into our lives, into those lives around us. So there are certain rituals associated with prayer, which speaks to this idea of climbing the ladder. Torah study is about gaining knowledge and wisdom, studying divine wisdom. Doing a mitzvah is about making the world a better place. Prayer is about climbing up that ladder. So it's prayer, it's meditation, it's song in prayer, dance, a little bit.
Or move, and I think
Some sort of movement.
The shuffling.
Shuffling.
I don't know if that's just a human standing a long time.
It's interesting. So there's a Jewish thing. When people pray, when Jews pray, they're typically going like this. Right? I'm mirroring the shuckling right now. I'm doing the shuckle, right? Shimmy and shake. No, so it's like a steady motion back and forth, or it could be side to side, or it could be a rotation like this, like the old oscillating fan motion. Right? Different versions of the shuckling, and different Jewish authors have written about why the shuckling. I'll tell you an interesting theory, a very mundane theory. One theory, and it's written in some books, is that back in the day, Jews didn't have access to a lot of books. They had one copy of the Talmud, and they had 20 students. So how did 20 students study from the same book? They each take a turn dipping in. So they're dipping in, and that creates a movement while studying, which then transfers over to prayer and to other forms of Jewish life and ritual. That's one theory. Another theory has it that it represents the buoyancy or the movement of the soul. The body, in the moment of prayer, the body is reflecting the movement of the soul. And like a flame, the soul is flickering. So that actually takes me into a very interesting discussion about fire. The Kabbalists love light and they love fire. The nature of fire is unlike anything else in existence. The nature of fire is to not exist. Fire wants one thing and only one thing. Fire doesn't want to exist. How do I know this? You put fire and you attach it to anything. What does it do? It burns that thing. It obliterates that thing. And when it burns everything, what happens to the fire? It goes out. Fire has one desire, and that is non-existence. You see, water, you put water into a cup, it's very calm. I'll be here for a while. Yeah, don't leave the lights, don't leave the lights on. I'm good. You put earth, you put earth in a space, sand in a sandbox, it's not going anywhere. You put fire somewhere, it's moving, it's flickering, it's unsettled. The fire doesn't want to be here, the Kabbalists say. Fire wants to go back to the source. Fire has one desire, and it's non-existence. Not total non-existence, but to be subsumed, or to once again reconnect with its spiritual source, the source of fire in the divine realms. That's what fire wants. And it's reflected again in physical properties. You take a candle and you turn it to its side, the flame still points up. No matter where you turn the candle, the flame will always point up. And its nature is, again, to undo itself. It will burn through everything until there's nothing else left so that it can get out of here. This is the child. It's like the child that you want to keep in the room, and the child is bouncing out of the room. It's like, how do I get out of here? How do I escape? Fire wants to escape. So the Kabbalists say the soul, in its purest form, the soul also wants to escape. The soul feels God, it senses God, and it wants to go up. Prayer is its outlet for ascension, which is why, like a flame that flickers, because of the tension, it doesn't want to be drawn by the wick. It wants to go back up, but it's being schlepped, it's being held down. So it's fighting against it, it's fighting. So that movement is the flame fighting. So too in prayer, that's kind of the soul's expression. The body is mirroring the soul's movement of escapism, of trying to escape. Now, here's the qualification. Although prayer is somewhat of the escape, like I mentioned before we pray, we make sure to give something, do a tangible mitzvah, give some charity, to make sure that no matter how high we go in prayer, we're reminded that if we want to truly get to God, unlike the fire that might disappear, God says, you love me? You want to hang around me? Good. Now go back. Right? I want you there. It's like a couple. And the wife asked the husband, can you go to the store and get something for me? And the husband says, but I love you, I want to be with you. And she's like, okay, I get that, but if you really love me, please go, and then you can come back. I need you there. If you really love me, go. Get away from me. Not in a bad way, but in a good way. Right? If you really love me, I want you there, not here. So selfishly, you want to be next to the one that you love. But if you really love them and they want you somewhere else, then you go where you're wanted, where you're needed. So God says to the soul, you love me? Yeah. You want to be close to me? Of course. You want to really be close to me? Yeah. You want to do what I want you to do? Yeah. Okay, so go back. But prayer is that taste of connection. And then after prayer, we come back down. So before prayer, we grounded. Prayer is the ascension. Following prayer, we bring it back down. This is the ebb and flow of life. That's why without prayer, without real prayer, I don't mean just chanting words. I mean without the experience of really connecting, communing, speaking with God, and feeling that lightness of spirit, of connection, of leaving the mundane behind, taking that soul vacation every morning. Now, before we jump into the day, taking 30 minutes or 15 minutes or 10 minutes or even 5 minutes of giving ourselves a break from the mundane, even before we start the mundane, and connect with God, that gives us the strength that when we go back into the world, we should do so in a way that's noble, in a way that's dignified, and not in a way that we get, lost in materialism and drowning in, the rivers of whatever's around us.